Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Prosper Nutrition Coaching channel. I am so excited to bring a really awesome nutrition coaching expert to all of you. I've got Dr. Mike T. Nelson, who knows so much about metabolic flexibility, specifically to help nutrition coaches guide their clients to better overall results. And in today's podcast or today's episode, what we're going to dive right into are the three things that coaches need to know a little bit better in order to really use metabolic flexibility properly when they are working with a nutrition coaching client. So, Dr. Mike, I'm going to let you take it right away from there. Feel free to introduce yourself even a little bit more in your background so our viewers can get to know you. And then let's dive right into those points you were mentioning.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Dr. Mike Nelson. I have a nutrition certification, so Flex Diet certification, which we'll talk about metabolic flexibility here. I'm associate professor for the 𝗘𝗥 Institute. I work part-time for the guys over at Rapid Health Optimization. Have my own clients in business, primarily online right now. And yeah, do some consulting for a ketone company and a few other things. So yeah,
He's a busy guy. Going on. Yeah. So diving right into kind of that first area, what is one thing that nutrition coaches need to have a better understanding around when it comes to metabolic flexibility and nutrition coaching?
Yeah, so the three components of metabolic flexibility, and then we'll go into detail on each one, is number one, you can think of it kind of like a barbell. On the right-hand side of the barbell, how do you use carbohydrates? And then the second component on the left side or the other end of the barbell where most of the weights are, how well does your body use fats? And then the third component is how well and how fast can you switch back and forth between those two? So on number one, in terms of using carbohydrates, the way you can assess if your clients are using carbohydrates well or not, and this would be in a field setting, so non-formal, like I have a metabolic cart, but there's thousands of dollars. Most people don't have one. What would you do? I call it the two Pop-Tart test. You can have two Pop-Tarts for breakfast and just kind of see how you feel after that. If you want to take an insulin-induced nap under the table, you probably have some issues with carbohydrate metabolism. Now, again, you get fancy. You could, poke your finger and measure glucose, do a whole bunch of other stuff. But the reason I use Pop-Tarts are you can find them anywhere. They're cheap. They have some sort of weird frosting on them that is probably being used on the Elon Musk, rockets or something like that now because they don't seem to melt in the toaster.
Yeah.
It'll survive like a nuclear holocaust, so it'll be around for a while. And it's about 80 grams of carbohydrates. So it is a big bolus of processed carbohydrates. If you're doing well and you feel pretty good after that, you're probably okay on the carbohydrate end of the spectrum. If you're not, the main thing you'd want to focus on is some form of, shocker, exercise. So we know that high levels of exercise, the higher intensity you go, this can be weight training stuff, this could be intervals, that you are going to use more of that carbohydrate end of the spectrum for metabolism. The other part, too, that people forget is there's also what they call non-insulin and mediated insulin uptake, or glucose uptake, I should say. Just contracting muscle fibers can literally just pull glucose right out of the bloodstream. So getting more walking, or what's called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just walk around, get your step count in, maybe do some fidgeting, twitching, etc. That'll be able to pull glucose directly out of the bloodstream.
It's one of my favorite hacks, not to cut you off, but for anyone that has prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, where they're just like, oh, there's nothing I can do. I'm like, no, there's definitely stuff you can do. Just getting your muscles contracting, even if you've got insulin resistance, is like one of the coolest biology hacks to get your blood sugar levels down. So I'm so glad you mentioned that for our viewers and coaches.
Yeah, definitely.
So continuing on with this idea, I love the metaphor of the barbell and the two ends. We've got the Pop-Tart test, seeing how we feel, utilizing also like the muscles to actually take glucose out of the bloodstream without relying on insulin. Is there anything else coaches should be aware of in this first tenet of metabolic flexibility when it comes to nutrition coaching?
Yeah, I mean, from a programming standpoint, obviously making sure they're doing some weightlifting, which I'm sure they're already doing. Another component I think that does still get missed a fair amount is the aerobic system. So if you have a very small aerobic system, or your VO2 max is what we would use to measure it, is small, you just literally have a small engine. I often equate it to, I don't know if you remember the old the Yugos little 3-cylinder cars they had for a period of time.
Yep.
Like if you have a very small engine, you're just gonna redline it going to the grocery store. So everything else is gonna feel like it's gonna require more energy. So one of the complaints of clients is like, oh, I just feel like I don't have enough energy, and there are things that can help with that, sleep and nutrition. But a big thing that's missed is literally how big is your aerobic engine, your cardiovascular capacity. If that's really low, you literally have a small engine that's not able to produce enough energy or ATP. So there's a way you can test it with your clients. There's a bunch of different ways, but the main two that I like are, one is going to be on a Concept 2 rower. Just set it, warm up, and set it for 2,000 meters, and then have the person or the client go as hard as they can in 2,000 meters. You can take your little time. Just Google Concept 2. I think it's VO2 max. It should pop up right away. Put in their time, and it'll tell you exactly where they're at.
You're bringing back varsity rowing, bad
Oh
memories of
yeah,
the 𝗘𝗥𝗢𝗥 test, which is like the
that's
dreaded thing
horrible.
you have to do before seat racing on the water.
Yep. Oh yeah,
It
like
hurts. You go in the pain cave and you just sit there.
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean the gold standard for an erg, right? So an indoor rower is the 2K. I mean, that's just kind
Yep.
of, it's used for all sorts of stuff.
Right.
It's pretty horrible. It's pretty miserable. Every client will complain that they didn't pace it correctly, which they probably didn't. But I told clients, I'm like, hey, you want to do it again? We can do it again in 48 hours. And they're usually like, no, this is horrible. I don't want to do it again.
Yep.
And if they do, then they definitely didn't pace themselves the right way. And even then, difference of maybe 5 to 7 seconds, which, yeah, if you're elite level rower, that's like another freaking universe. But for this, we're just trying to get a approximation of where they're at,
Cool.
The other way, if they are able to run, is a 12-minute Cooper run test. So find a nice flat surface, warm up, set your watch to 12 minutes exactly. Most watches have a little GPS. Again, if you can get heart rate on either one of these, great. And just see how far you can run. And then you just type it in the old Google again, and it'll give you a VO2 max for that. And what you're looking for is the relative standards of that person, their age and gender. Gender doesn't make a huge difference. And just see where they are. I think of in thirds. Are they the bottom third, middle third, or top third? If they're in the bottom third of again, this is not athletes. This is just standard population-based data. They 100% need some work. If they're in the middle, probably. If they're near the top, maybe not. Depends on their goals. Depends on what they're wanting to do. But I started doing this probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I probably should have started 10 years earlier. It would have saved me massive amount of headache. Because again, back to carbohydrate metabolism, I can guarantee if their VO2 max, their ceiling is very low, it's affecting their energy production overall. And that will actually affect both carb and fat metabolism.
So cool. I already feel like for the coaches that maybe aren't using some of these fitness testing tools, like you said, they don't have to go out and buy a hundreds, or not hundreds of thousands, but very expensive metabolic cart machine, which again, most exercise facility, most fitness coaches aren't going to have the means to acquire a tool like that. But just putting someone on a Concept 2 erg, sending them out for a 12-minute run for the Cooper test, like very, very practical for coaches to actually help their clients measure their VO2 max. That's awesome. Thank you for those suggestions. So what I'm curious now is that second component of metabolic flexibility and working with clients.
Yeah, so the second component on the other end of the barbell would be how well your body can use fat. I think in our world, like, we get a little bit too concerned about the number, right? So what do you hear from people all the time? It's like, oh, metabolic rate's just too low. Yes, your metabolic rate can obviously scale because of calories, but the second component is how well and what fuel is your metabolism using. And the people I have measured who think they have a low metabolism, a lot of times it's really not that far off. They're just kind of missing some of the bigger rocks. So it feels like it's low. I understand why that's an issue. So the best test for fat metabolism, again, if you don't have a several $1,000 metabolic cart, I like to have people do a longer period of fasting. So if you can do a 19 to 24-hour fast, then it's not too bad. You can get your work done. You can even do some light exercise, and you generally feel pretty good. You don't have to completely white knuckle your way through it. Yes, consume fluid. Yes, consume your same amount of electrolytes. You're probably pretty good at using fat as an energy source, right? Because there isn't any fuel coming in at that point. You're not doing a lot of high intensity exercise. So the main fuel actually should be fat at that point. If you can't really get much past, 10 o'clock in the morning, you probably have some issues that you need to work for on that end. So what would you do to improve it? You can, if people are up to it, have them progressively do a longer fast. Brad Pilon talked about this years ago with Eat, Stop, Eat, which is, I still use that. The caveat is that I will have people progressively work up to it, because I found just having people do a 24-hour fast, if they're not accustomed or adapted to it, they could do it, but it was very hard and usually ended them, face down in a birthday cake or a buffet at the end of the day.
Right.
So it's not really what you want.
Right.
So just, take one day per week, push out breakfast. So instead of having breakfast at 8 a.m., just push it out to 10. Maybe that allows you to do a 10-hour fast. So the following week, see if you can move your breakfast to lunch. For whatever reason, if I told people to get rid of their breakfast, they got really mad at me and just eat lunch. So I told them, move your breakfast to lunch. I don't know why.
Yep.
They like that better. And then just take 4 or 5, 6 weeks, just one day per week, just moving out that timeline. Most people can then easily do, around a 19 to 24-hour fast. The other thing, which has been around forever, is you can do some fasted cardiovascular exercise. This gets into that whole debate about, is it the best way for fat loss or not, which is probably another hour podcast if you want to get into the details. But my argument is, when you're doing the low to moderate level intensity exercise, you don't really need carbohydrates to do that. So you might as well use fat. You might as well upregulate that system. Has a lot of benefits also in terms of just being a healthier human being at the same time. And it's just easy. For some people, that might just be a fasted walk in the morning.
Yep.
If you've got cardiovascular equipment at home, maybe getting on the bike, maybe doing a light row, whatever. And it also, in a practicality sense, eliminates almost every excuse you would have. Like, okay, well, what do I eat beforehand? You don't eat, you just fasted.
Yeah.
Well, do I need to drink any water? Like, if you want. Like, what do I do for my warm-up? It's probably low enough intensity. You don't really need a warm-up.
Right.
So like you can kind of get rid of a lot of the excuses people have and just simplify it and just make it a lot easier.
Cool. Okay, so we've got our one end of the barbell, we've got our Pop-Tarts, we've got the carbohydrate, understanding how your body metabolizes that fuel. The other end of the barbell, we have our fats, figuring out how well, especially using fasting as an experiment, to just get really curious about, well, how does that make your body feel? And can you easily kick into fat burning mode? Because like you said, we've cut off the source of like active fuel coming in. So I would love for you to elaborate on the third component of metabolic flexibility when it comes to sort of better understanding our nutrition.
Yeah, so the third component is how well and how fast can you switch back and forth between those two fuels. So in a perfect world, if you go do some, let's say, weight training exercise, or you do some, Jen's favorite, high intensity stuff on the rower, how well can you upregulate to use those carbohydrates to fuel that exercise performance? And then how well can you get back down to baseline to back to using fat again? Obviously, some of this depends upon nutrition. But one of the big things that I think people forget is you can have a rough surrogate marker by looking at heart rate recovery after exercise. So if you go do, let's say, your 2K max that you're doing now as part of your assessment, at the end, you will look and see what is their max heart rate. And then you would just give them, there's a 1 or a 2-minute test. I use the 2-minute test. Just measure 2 minutes, just rest quietly. Don't, just hang out. And then see how far their heart rate dropped from peak down to rest, or what's called heart rate recovery. And there's different stats, there's different norms for this. But if you peaked out at, say, 160 and 2 minutes later, you're still only at 130, like it's kind of impaired. And that, again, that is back to your aerobic system again. But what this is simply telling you is that you were at, a lot of oxidation of carbohydrates, but now it's taking you quite a while to get back down to baseline again. Or if you do like an oral glucose tolerance test, like you have a whole bunch of carbohydrates, blood glucose goes really high, and then it takes a long, long period of time to get back down to baseline. So you're kind of stuck in that sort of carbohydrate end of the spectrum. So after your max test, now you can add on just a very simple 2-minute test of a heart rate recovery. Again, you can look up, standards and norms for that also. And then the other part I would look at is, again, related to this, is the output. So the higher output you can do, you're just literally using more carbohydrates.
Right.
So one of the big things with programming related to nutrition is with weight training, we want to see clients, are you able to do more weight, more work, lift more, and then could you combine it? You could cram the density shorter. Same thing with cardiovascular training. So if you are getting some of those output adaptations over time, not only is that helping your muscle, your body comp, and everything else, you're just a much more fit individual. That's going to allow you to do these transitions between fuels much, much better too.
You know what I love about all the suggestions you've come up with in the three caveats is that they're so accessible and affordable. Like you're not making us go out and spend thousands of dollars on really expensive equipment.
Oh no.
It's fitness equipment that's available in most standard gyms. Most personal trainers have access to it. I mean, most clients that are into kind of the data and being a bit nerdy are probably wearing, some kind of wearable tech where they're going to be able to get GPS and heart rate and tools like that. And then, like you said, you can just go on Google if you know the time parameters that a coach should be looking for, and then help your client better assess where they are in using their different fuels around carbohydrates and fats. That's really, really cool.
Yep.
Are there
One quick
any
note
sort
on
of
the
like,
wearables, though. Just a quick note on that is,
yeah, speak up.
if you do an absolute max test on a wearable, like most of them are pretty good now, but they still may miss the peak.
Right.
So you probably still need to pair to an old school heart rate strap.
Yeah. So you just want
Because I
around the
made that
chest.
mistake. Like, because a lot of times I don't ask what watch they had, and maybe 4 years old or whatever. So just
Right.
FYI in that. But I 100% agree. Like, to do all these now, you don't need a lot of very fancy tech at all.
Yeah, that's so awesome for our viewers because now they don't have to go out and spend a fortune to be able to kind of recreate almost like a laboratory like setting in their practice working with their clients. So if you were to leave our listeners with any like one major important tip or understanding around metabolic health, metabolic nutrition, metabolic flexibility, what's the one thing you want, our listeners to really take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, it's a little bit esoteric, but I always think of what is the response of the system and what is the output,
Mm,
right? So if you just had the two Pop Tarts, what is your response in the carbohydrate end? If you did a longer fast, what is the response? If you're looking at exercise, I try to think of what is the output you're trying to get over time, capacity. And so if you just think about, okay, if you kind of just think through the lens of those two things and then go, oh, wow, that was kind of a weird response. I wonder what's
yeah.
going on. Or, wow, it just seems like their ability to do this thing is very limited. I think you'll be able to figure out kind of the next steps of what direction to go, even though those are a little esoteric.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know that this is something that for the coaches who want to go a little bit deeper, you actually do have a certification available for people to actually learn more and then become certified in this. Go ahead and just share like your contact info and how people can learn about this metabolic certification and yeah, like how to find you and how it works.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, similar to you, I also have a certification, and one of the main reasons I started it was, real briefly, I did a lot of work through Precision Nutrition,
Mhm.
John Berardi, and then these guys early on, and they were awesome. And I definitely agree, like when you're on my podcast, like habit change, all that stuff, definitely you need to know that. But the funny part was I kept getting more physiology questions from trainers. And I'm like, wow, okay, interesting. They're like, but I just feel like I don't know enough about the physiology. And they're not going to go back and do a 4-year degree. Some of them did have 4-year degrees.
Right.
So I came up with something where it's based more on the physiology of metabolic flexibility. We talk about proteins, fats, carbohydrates, NEAT, micronutrition, sleep, exercise. And it's more on the physiology side. And then I took a lot of the habit change and the motivational interviewing, which we talked about,
Yep.
and I sort of just baked it into the system. So for people who felt like they needed to know more about the physiology, they got more of the physiology, but it's still within a system where you're still respecting the client's ability to change and what the client actually wants to do, or what I call rigging the system in your client's favor. So we
Yeah.
didn't just take all the psychology and throw it out, but it's baked into the actual system itself. So that is the Flex Diet certification. It's about 28 hours long. It's 100% online. You can take it anywhere. There's little quizzes to pass. And then we have expert interviews from, everyone like on protein research from Dr. Stu Phillips, Dr. Jose Antonio, flexible dieting from Dr. Eric Helms, sleep, Dr. Dan Party. So we've got about like 8 or 9 different expert interviews in there also. So if they want more info on that, they can just go to flexdiet.com. I do have some stuff on Instagram, which is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. And then the main thing that I have most information is through the daily newsletter, which you could get on for free. Just go to miketnelson.com, go to the top and just go newsletter. And then there you'll be able to get on for free. You can even send me a little reply there and tell me you heard me here, and I'll give you a free gift. So the newsletter will have info on the certification and everything else also there. So that's probably the best place.
That's so awesome and so kind of you. I mean, I always love that. I always joke that the kind of coaches that find their way to prosper are what I call kind nerds. They're the coaches who don't just stop after their first certification. They're always hungry of like, okay, what's the next piece of the puzzle that if I learn that little bit more, I'm going to level up my coaching skills to be better at solving my clients' problems. And, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I think we're both in the same boat. The coaches that continue to invest in their skill set tend to be the highest paid coaches in our industry.
Oh, yeah.
And are the ones that don't fizzle out after 1 or 2 years because they can't get or keep clients. And it's because they can drive results. Not only do they understand the psychology of behavior change, but they actually have that like scientific knowledge to back up what's really happening with physiology. So I love it. It's like a 1-2 punch to keep going deeper.
Yeah, and like you said, as people are able to confidently take on more complicated cases,
Mhm.
not only do I find as they progress in their career, for most people, it's a little bit more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And shocker, you can also charge more money because you're solving more difficult things for people, and they're going to be willing to pay for that too.
100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with all of us. I will link everything down below so you can go find Dr. Mike T. Nelson on his website, get on his Instagram, get on his newsletter list, and definitely message him back so you can take advantage of that free gift.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.